Navigating the Four podcast, where we discuss all things faith, healing, leadership, and communication. Exploring the topic of communication, I'm Matt Barker, and I'm joined by the other hosts of the podcast. Tackling the topic of faith, we have Freed-Hardeman Professor of Bible, Matt Cook.
Hey, guys.
Exploring the perspective of leadership, we have Assistant Dean of Emerging and Innovative Programs at Freed-Hardeman, Mr. Jared Gott.
Hello.
And giving us the perspective of all things mental health, the Director of the University Counseling Center here at Freed-Hardeman, Mr. Nathan Judd.
It's a counselor thing.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us for this episode of Navigating the Four, where we bring you real talk, fresh perspectives, and a few laughs along the way. Whether you're in the middle of figuring out life or just here for some good conversation, you're in the right place. So grab a seat, maybe a cup of coffee, and let's start navigating the four together. All right, welcome to Season 2, Episode 7, where we will dive into the topic of attachment and our relationship with God. And for this topic, I'll turn it over to our in-house counselor, Mr. Nathan Judd.
In-house counselor. I provide a lot of counseling for these guys, but I can't talk about it.
We need it.
I am so excited about this episode. I've had this topic down since the beginning of Season 1, and somehow we've never gotten around to it. But I heard about this on another podcast, and then I bought the book that the podcast talked about. But the book is called Attached to God by Crispin Mayfield. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that this book has totally changed me. I have passed out some assessments to the guys that they prepped ahead of time. It's identifying our attachment style with God. But have you guys ever heard of attachment theory? Do you know what that is?
No. I've heard of the name attachment theory. I've never taken a deep dive into what it means.
No, I've heard you talk about it, I think maybe once or twice, but I've never looked into it either.
So the idea behind attachment theory, and it's very well researched. In fact, in the book, Crispin Mayfield calls it attachment science because there is so much data to support it. But early people studying this were like John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth, and the idea is that we as basically babies have an attachment figure, usually our mom, and based on how she responds to our needs is how we view all relationships. So there's one called a secure attachment style, and that's basically if a baby cries out for a diaper change or to be fed and mom responds, then that baby learns that it's safe to reach out with needs for others. And then the brain gets wired around that, literal wired, is it develops this, I can be vulnerable and open in relationships with others. And there are other attachment styles. Bowlby would name these differently, but in the book that we're referencing here, we have anxious attachment, shutdown attachment, and shame-filled attachment. It all goes back to relationship with parents, how our needs were met, or caregivers, how our needs were met, what we learn about all relationships. So then we view all relationships through this lens of how our needs were met with our parents. And then this book takes it a step further, which kind of blew my mind when I thought about this, but it makes sense. If you think about the brain being wired to view all relationships this way, then how could I not also view my relationship with God through the same lens based on how my brain is wired? And so that's the concept of the podcast today, and we're just going to talk through some of that and see where everybody lands. But we've had an assessment passed out to look at our spiritual attachment, our attachment to God, and I'm curious where everybody lined up on that.
I got shutdown attachment, so I got 11. And as we were talking before the podcast, I thought all of these kind of sounded more like on the negative, like, a lot of these sound kind of bad, which we talked about. There's not really one that's bad necessarily. But I got shutdown attachment. I've received an 11 score from what I filled out. And then the next one was a 6 on anxious attachment. So I would say overall shutdown attachment is what I got.
Did anybody else get shutdown attachment?
I did.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, so I had, that was my highest. I had 13 on that. And then some on anxious, very few, like 1 on shame-filled attachment. So a clear front runner in shutdown attachment.
Yeah, so shutdown attachment, what this has to do with, this person is uncomfortable with closeness. I'm remembering Matt Barker in the sex episode. That was,
Yeah, that probably tracks,
seeks head knowledge to feel connected to God, is afraid of being overwhelmed by emotions.
So you saying that, and the little bit of reading I did before this, I was thinking on that personality testing episode we did, and mine tended to be I like to find out a lot of information, a lot of data. And then what I do with that, who knows, right? But always just wanting to kind of dive a little deeper. So when I read that, I was like, that seems in line with what I know of myself, kind of a thing. So that tracked.
Yeah, I would say me too. And with the, seeking knowledge to feel connected, I think just in not just with God, but also like Jared said, in everyday aspects of life, I kind of want to know the data, like what is supporting this, and want to have some basis on like why I'm doing what I'm doing. So if you're planning an event, I want to know like everything that could go wrong so I can try to figure out how to fix that before it happens. Yeah. But the other part is afraid of being overwhelmed by emotions. I feel like very uncomfortable in certain situations like you talked about. I'm the kind of person that like, I think I feel emotions, but I don't necessarily want everybody to see that. Like if there's a song at church that kind of gets me, I'm more like, I'm not like just letting, like going to cry, but I'm looking like, if I cry, someone's going to be like, dude, he's crying right now. And I'm going to make somebody else uncomfortable by me crying. And I'm thinking about it too much instead of just letting those emotions maybe take over. I guess I think about what other people are thinking about me probably too much. And some of that is like these emotions, like I don't want people to see me doing this. So yeah, I think it for those two in particular about the wanting knowledge and sometimes being uncomfortable, afraid of being overwhelmed by emotions. I try to like to be in control of things, I guess. And so if I feel like I'm not in control of something, whether that be emotions or something going on, I feel really uncomfortable about it.
Yeah. And I don't know anything about any of you guys' relationship with your parents growing up. So I'm kind of speaking in generalities, and I'm not asking us to necessarily get into our stories or anything like that. You can if you want. But typically with this shutdown attachment style, it's coming from a place of a child who wasn't able to express emotions, or parents were uncomfortable with that. And so they're trying to make the emotions go away. And so this child learns, when I have emotional experiences, I feel disconnection. And so what do I need to do? I need to learn all the right things and lean on this knowledge, this data. And that's kind of where that comes from. Yeah.
Curious to see what Matt Cook got on this one, because I don't think he got the same one as me and Jared. So.
No, I did not. So I got anxious attachment.
Yeah.
I got a 13 and then a 4 and 3.
Nathan said, yeah, like he knew that was
No, I also got anxious too.
So that one is interesting because the description here, which again is new to me, I've never thought about this before. Desperate for closeness, seeks emotional experiences of faith, feels anxious about losing connection. That seeks emotional experiences of faith, that may seem odd for a Bible faculty person at Freed Hardeman, because you would think the knowledge side, but I think I just directed a weekend called the Global Missions Experience. And as I think about the way that I shaped that weekend, it was a lot of my thought processes were, how can we make this a great experience? Obviously, there were classes and all this stuff, and knowledge is important. But for me, it was like, I want everybody to have a really, really great experience. And I want to have a great experience. Yeah. So I think that tracks. It's a little strange. I've never thought of it from this perspective, but yeah.
Yeah. I also landed in anxious today. I think in the past, I've been in shutdown, but I think maybe that's a reflection of some of the work that I've done on myself, where I've maybe healed in some of those areas of being more comfortable with vulnerability and leaning into that. But then the anxious is like, my relationships depend on me and my energy in making sure that relationship is there. And so I think, if I remember right, the example in the book is there's a kid playing on the playground and he falls and skins his knee, and he looks up and mom is just reading a book, not paying attention. And so what that child learns from that experience is, I need to make sure that mom's paying attention to me, because if I don't do more to make sure she's paying attention, I might fall again and get hurt and she doesn't know it. So then that child clings to mom quite a bit to make sure that the relationship is there. And you can think about how this might get portrayed in other relationships. I can think of a specific, very embarrassing dating relationship where I leaned into anxious attachment and ended up goofing up the relationship because I was like testing, is the relationship okay? Is the relationship okay? And I was always worried that it was gonna fall apart. But I felt like the relationship depended on me. And when we think about our relationship with God, that's maybe you guys can relate to this, but this has been a lot of my experiences. I'm never quite doing enough, and so I need to make sure I'm working harder to be close to God, just doing all the things. So the other one is shame-filled, and none of us scored with this one. This one wants closeness but is afraid of punishment, punishes self for not being holy enough to get connection, feels lonely but is worried about being judged. I'm glad I don't score there, but man, Matt Cook's doing an episode soon about accidental Pharisees, and I would think that column may track with that episode, is the total depravity of who you are as a human being. And you are so lucky that you have a God that deserves you with how horrible you are. And those messages are out there, and I'm not saying all of that's wrong. I'm not saying we deserve to go to heaven, but looking at ourselves as this horrible creature that deserves eternal salvation all the time is probably not the way we need to be viewing ourselves.
Yeah, I was looking at these and I was thinking about the different careers or things that you do with your professional life, how these kind of correspond to some of these things. So I was thinking about for Nathan, you and Matt Cook specifically with the anxious attachment, desperate for closeness, feels anxious about losing connection. I'm thinking, Matt, as a preacher, this is something that probably all preachers worry about is, do I feel close to the people that I'm trying to lead in my congregation, trying to know each and every member as best as you can so you know their individual needs. Nathan, as a counselor, I would think that would be something that a lot of what counselors do is building those relationships, kind of trying to understand where people are coming from, and a lot of that has to do with what are they telling you, what are relationships that you're building. So I'm thinking, and then maybe about the shutdown one about, Jared's job working in emerging and innovative programs, organizing all the various programs he has to be in charge of. A lot of that is like, okay, what data are we seeing? How can we do this better? So I think a lot of it might have to do with the careers we choose, things we do in our professional lives have a little bit to do with that as well, in addition to our attachment with God as well.
Totally agree. Some of the things in the book, like we're thinking about relationship with parents, with caregivers, but then also think about your upbringing in your church culture, what religion looked like to you, and how that also shaped the way your brain was growing and viewing things. And it talks about how none of us ever can have a full, accurate picture of who God is. I know we think about, God's so big, we can't comprehend how big he is, but we can't even view him accurately. And so if you think about your relationship with parents and how you were raised, if you think about your church experience, if you think about your race, your gender, interactions with the community, whether that's local, regional, what country you're in, all of these things have wired your brain in a way that you have a view of God, and it describes it as a ripple, as a ripple of a ripple of a ripple of a ripple. And that's what we view God as being, but that is not actually the true source of who God is. And so the striving in the book is to get as close to a secure attachment with God as you can, and to be able to rest in his arms. It uses the metaphor of a cozy cabin in the woods where you just go there and you don't have to do anything. You're just able to be at peace. You think about Jesus says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." When people bring spiritual struggles to me and they don't feel that way about their relationship with Jesus, I just think that something needs to be looked at there. There's something missing if we don't feel like the burden is light and the yoke is easy. There's just a lot that goes into it. And like I say, reading this book, I was challenged. My guard was up as I read it, put it down after finishing it, and I thought about it for about 2 weeks and just had this peace and said, no, I agree with every word in that book. It did. It changed me. It changed how I view my relationship with God, because I can try to lean on the head knowledge or do more to make sure that my relationship with God is okay. Not that big to be able to do that. My relationship with God, there's a lot that he can do that I can't do.
So one of the things that I've been just kind of writing some notes down as we've been talking and trying to think through, I'm thinking through how do these attachment styles cross over, like a shift from one style to another. Mm-hmm. And specifically what I'm thinking about is like my own personal faith, my own personal relationship with God versus the role that I may find myself in working with others in faith, for example, working in youth ministry, right? Mm-hmm. I'm thinking through, okay, setting aside my own personal faith for a minute, I'm planning a retreat, right? I'm planning an event for a variety of individuals who are mostly junior high school aged, trying to teach them what it means to be disciples, trying to teach them what it means to walk in faith and develop their own faith. They're still growing. Now I'm thinking through it through the lens of they may be coming from all these different, right, attachment styles. So my primary style may be, let's set aside that emotion, right?
Sure.
I'm thinking through logistics. I'm thinking through what's best for the group, I think. But now I'm kind of thinking through it but that's filtered through what I think would be best based on the attachment style I may be feeling in that moment, kind of a thing, which tends to be, how do you see yourself in the larger sort of faith story, right, throughout all of time? I don't know. It's given me a lot to think about. I'm thinking about that dichotomy of where do I see myself personally in my own study, my own spiritual disciplines, my own day-to-day walk, versus the things that I try to plan, and how much do those bleed into one another? I don't know. It's given me some good thoughts.
Yeah. There's not a right or wrong, but recognizing that, if I plan this perfect retreat, or if I plan this perfect event over the weekend, like Matt Cook was talking about, then I've done more to put religious currency in my relationship with God, and he's looking at me like, hey, you did well, so now I'm closer to you today than I was yesterday. So that's kind of how I'm looking at that. There is a metaphor too. We look at these like they're bad, but the metaphor is, if there's a plant in a dark room and there's a crack in the wall, the plant grows sideways towards the crack because that's where it's getting nourishment. And then if we take that plant outside and plant it around all the other vegetation, we look at it and we think, what's wrong with that plant? Why is it growing sideways? But all it's doing is everything it always knew to get nutrition. And that's what we as people do, is we grow up in our version of a dark room that's not the full perfect picture that God designed. And so we figure out how to get that nutrition, and our brains get wired that way. Connection, safety. And so we end up growing sideways in our own way. And then when we get in these healthy environments, that doesn't just go away. We still view relationship through that lens. And so maybe you can picture people that they seem to be growing sideways in their relationship with others. You're like, there's probably a reason why they're doing that.
That's an interesting awareness to have now, right? In the experiences that I may feel like do better to draw closer to God, or to build up my faith, may be very different for people depending on kind of this theory, science. Not to say that those are, there's no, like you've said, there's no good or bad, right? It's not like I'm setting aside one good thing to do something that doesn't fit. It's just, it's effectiveness, right? It's thinking through the leadership role of that, and not just putting something together based on my own thoughts, but also having an awareness of what is actually effective and useful to those that I'm trying to lead.
That's right.
Yeah, my question with all of this is, you mentioned the research about your babies and that kind of stuff. How much of this is nature versus nurture? Because I think some of what we're describing isn't just the product of what your mom did or your dad did. Some of this is God-given personality, right? Yeah. So, I think about Jared and his attention to details and knowledge and that sort of thing. Yeah. I think that's God-given personality and God-given strengths, where all of us are kind of different. And we want Jared in any sort of situation leading in that area.
That's right.
And I wouldn't put that on his parents. I'd put that more on the way God created him. And then I wonder sometimes about how much of this is impacted by the culture into which you were born. Like all three of these categories, there are three major categories when we think about missions: worldview, and there's guilt, innocence. That's us, where everything is kind of black and white. We mess up, we're guilty, and we seek forgiveness so that we can feel innocent, right? And it's the whole court system. And that feels pretty shut down sort of thing. And then there's shame, honor, which is clearly the shame-filled one, the middle one, where everything is shameful. And then I've never thought of myself with this desperate for closeness, emotional experience. That's like the fear-power worldview. That's like the tribal situations where it's all about experiencing the divine, and we don't want to lose connection with him. I don't know. I got a lot of feelings and things running through my mind as I think about what would cause these three different attachment styles. Like you said, none of them are necessarily bad. I think obviously it can be impacted by our surroundings, but I wonder if some of this is just we were created with different personalities, and when we bring all of us together with all of these personalities and experiences, boy, it creates the body of Christ, which then says, okay, there's some people who want to create an experience, and there's some people who are really going to focus in on that knowledge, and you bring those together, and you've got a full demonstration of who God is and what he's about. Even like this weekend, I worked a lot with Kevin Moore, one of our colleagues, and he's a knowledge guy, right? And you need details. he will handle it, and he's great at sharing information and gathering lists of here's what Scripture says about this, and this. But bring all that together, and boy, we've got a picture of the fullness of the kingdom of God.
I love that. How we experience early childhood definitely impacts how our personalities and things, and in addition to things that are already instilled in us.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking like what Matt Cook said about how we all kind of naturally certain ways, the way God made us and personalities, the way that we do things. I was looking at the one on shutdown here, the needs that people with the shutdown attachment have to know God is with me in all emotions, even sadness and worry. And I think part of that for me, and Jared also got this, he might agree to this, but when you think about sadness and worry, for example, part of what drives maybe the way I do things is, well, I'm worried about something. I'm not doing enough to get this done, so I shouldn't worry about it. Like if I'm nervous about a lesson, I'm worried about it. I need to study more so I can feel more prepared, so I'm not going to worry about it anymore. Or if it's some event we have going on, I don't feel comfortable with this event, I'm kind of worried, a little bit anxious about it. Let me do more to prepare for it so I'm not worried. And a lot of that was when I first started working in Nashville, I was someone that went around and trained people at the high schools and counselors and different things like that, high school counselors. And my boss would always tell me, he's like, "Are you feeling good about it?" I'm like, "I'm not really ready yet." He's like, "Over prepare and you'll be good to go." And I think that part of that was instilled in like, hey, if you feel nervous or anxious about it, over prepare so you feel like you can answer any question that comes at you, which isn't a bad thing, I wouldn't say.
Not at all.
But I was kind of, I guess, trained to be, if you're worried about it, you're not doing enough to prepare for it. And I think maybe from a religious standpoint, if I'm nervous, anxious about something, those are natural emotions that everybody has, but the way you respond to it, I think, is different. So the attachment style you have might say someone that's worried about something with an anxious attachment style might respond differently than someone with a shutdown because of just maybe part of what Matt said is just the way we are all built. God made us all in different ways. Some people are just more anxious than others. You know, some people don't have a care in the world, or at least they don't appear to. Others seem to worry more about things than others, and that causes you to behave in different ways than maybe other people with different personalities would, I think.
I wonder how, like for the shutdown side, seeks head knowledge to feel connected to God. Think about people who grew up in a church where that was the emphasis.
Yeah.
It was a church where head knowledge is what leads to connection to God, and how out of that can come two different extremes, right? Some people, the next generation, they continue in that, and they're all about, well, of course, this is how we feel connection to God. But then some, like the opposite side, kind of rebel against that, and it's like, it's just interesting how one environment can produce polar opposites. The people who stick with that, and then the people who are like, I'm sick of this head knowledge stuff. Give me an experience.
Yeah.
I don't know how that contributes to the conversation or how it helps, other than say it's just really fascinating.
Yeah, I was looking when I saw it, about worry. And one of the things from a religious standpoint, if I'm worrying, my faith isn't strong enough. Like I don't have the information I need to feel comfortable with this. People that want more of a religious experience need that, not just what it says in the Bible, but also how do I feel about it? Do I have the emotional experience that I need as well? So it is interesting to look at for sure.
I want to get into what the needs are. Matt Barker referenced that. So as we're talking about the shutdown, it says to know God is present with me in all emotions, even sadness and worry. And then there's a healthy response and an unhealthy response. And the healthy one is connection with body, others, and the story of Scripture. What that leads to is engagement with God. But the unhealthy response would be avoidance through tasks, through knowledge, which leads to disconnection. And then when we get into the anxious attachment, the need is to know God won't abandon me no matter what. Man, that's the thing for me. I'm like, oh, he's not going to abandon me. Well, I don't know. I haven't been doing the right things right now. And internally, I can feel like, oh, he's probably not with me right now. He was with me yesterday, but now he's not with me. And it's this on and off again thing. But the healthy response is Sabbath, to have rest. The unhealthy response is to cling through performance. And then that leads to exhaustion. And we didn't talk too much about the shame-filled one. And I didn't really explain too well what that looks like and how it originates, but parents should be the source of safety and protection for their children. But what if a child goes to them to be connected, but they're not safe there? So then to get safety, they have to disconnect, but now they're not connected even though they're safe. And so you can think about all the stories a child might tell himself or herself in that. And there are a lot of people who view their relationship with God that way. And the need here is to know that God likes me. Not just loves me, but God likes me. The healthy response is to experience your belovedness through God. That results in a joy of being loved. The unhealthy response is shame through self-punishment, and that leads to shame and self-hatred. So we want to be able to rest in our relationship with God and work towards that.
All right, thanks for joining us on Navigating the Four for today's episode. We hope that today's conversation sparks something real in your faith, your healing, your leadership, or your communication. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Till next time, keep showing up, keep growing, and keep navigating the four. We'll see you next time on Navigating the Four podcast.